Back with another episode of the Blue Turf. This is Stab Bell from the KC Soccer Journal. With me, as usual, is Eric Bergrud from the Kansas City Comets broadcast team. And just, I don't know, I see pictures of you, seems like everywhere, Eric. But how are you today?
Hey, Happy New Year, Thad, not only to you, but all our listeners and everybody in Comets Nation.
Yeah, hope everybody had a safe New Year's. That's amateur night for a lot of people. They go out and get stupid, so I'm always worried about everybody. I know I've been out there doing that myself at one point in my life, but stayed up, saw fireworks, music, people in the neighborhood blowing off fireworks. Do you have an interesting New Year's? Anything interesting
I
besides?
had we could talk about the Comets ambush afternoon game, but it was pretty subdued. Had dinner out and got home early and played it safe.
Yeah, it has been a minute since we were able to pod. Just life has gotten in the way, and we had a bad recording on one of them that wasn't helping with one of them. So anyway, it's been a while, and we are 9 games into the season, which officially passed the third waypoint last game, the previous game. Um, you want to talk about this first third as a chunk, and then we can kind of start breaking down last night's game, yesterday's game, New Year's Eve game, and then going forward. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really good way to look at this stat. A couple seasons ago, I had a conversation with Coach Stokic about viewing the season, and he chunked it into thirds: first third, second third, third third. So they wrapped up the first third 6-2, which I think is fine. I think that when they look back, there's probably a few regrets, but also some gains that they made. I think that their schedule, we'll talk a lot about all this St. Louis, but they had 2 weekends where they had to make a trip to Utica after having played a previous game. And so they're going to feel really good about the 2 wins they got in Utica. Granted, one of them was overtime, but they'll also look back at that home loss against Milwaukee as an opportunity missed. And looking ahead to the second third, they get Milwaukee again at home on January 11th and then at Milwaukee on the 18th, which happens to be my birthday. So I'm hoping for 3 points then. This month coming up is going to be critical because I think 6-2 was a good way to start the first third, but you get into the second third, and we'll talk about that St. Louis game yesterday. They got a point, which is fine, but really now you have to look at maximizing every opportunity, which is 3 points for sure at home and likely 2+ on the road.
Or at least averaging that 2+ on the road.
Sure.
Um, yeah, because you can't plan to go into every overtime and then win it. Yeah, 6-2. If you just said before the season, like, yeah, you'll go 6-2 in the first third, you probably go, okay, you could hope for better, but that's not bad. It's okay. I just feel like the 2 games they lost, they looked not good at all. That was, I mean, overall the season, I know we've asked Coach some of these questions, and he's said that he doesn't feel like they've played a complete game, and that's very coach speak. I've heard coaches across the league, across every league, say that sort of thing. But I think it's very true. They haven't played a complete game. They haven't played perfect offense, perfect defense for the most part in any game. But the 2 losses look kind of bad.
No, they look kind of bad. I mean, first of all, going into Baltimore, every team seems to struggle in Baltimore, and that's
Yep.
not discounting what happened to the Comets there. Milwaukee just played there recently, and they were down 7-1, but made it a game at the end and wound up losing 10-7. But in the end, a loss is a loss. So if you lose by 10 goals, you lose by 1 goal. In the standings, it's the same thing. And so the ability to be resilient and look ahead to the next game, for me, that was probably one of the most critical weekends of the season so far. They got destroyed by Baltimore, had to drive overnight to Utica, got to their hotel at like 3 a.m. and won the next day. And so that tells you a lot about the character of this team. And the good news is they get a little bit of a break from 2 game weekends. I know they have one coming up mid month in January where they have a Friday night game at home and then a Sunday game at Milwaukee. But Milwaukee has to play San Diego Saturday night at home before hosting the Comets. So that sort of balances out. Everybody complains about the schedule one way or the other, but I think that the Comets get a little bit of a pause from scheduling
from the worst part of the
challenges.
scheduling.
Yeah, yeah. But we will talk about how the schedule against St. Louis impacted some of Coach Stokic's decisions when we talk about yesterday's game on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, and while we did talk about the Baltimore game, and it was not a good showing there, and it's always tough to play there. And Milwaukee, like you said, did was down like was it 7-1 I think, and then
Yep.
made it close. I'd rather have a game that you made it close because you can feel good about it. Not, but I do wonder if maybe not looking back at who played the most minutes or whatever in that Baltimore game, but maybe once they got down, it was like, well, we'll just focus on tomorrow to save some legs or something like that because
Well,
that was a very tough road trip. Evening in Baltimore and essentially afternoon in Utica. So they didn't even get that extra couple hours of a full 24 hours between games.
yeah,
Again,
well, a lot of teams have to deal with that. San
yeah,
Diego has that trip coming up, and so with Harrisburg taking a break from MASL this season, they're playing MASL too. That a lot of teams are going to be facing that Baltimore Utica back to back or same weekend, and so uh, every team that has to deal with it has to figure out. It's not like you can bring 25 players on the trip and rotate. You're going to bring 16 or 17 and have to figure out a way through it because Utica has those Sunday afternoon games. You're looking at that as the second half of the weekend in Baltimore, which is tough because of the field. You start off with a tough game, and then you have to figure out how do we have enough legs to get a good result the second game.
right. So schedule aside and results aside for the moment, how do you feel the team has looked in this first third?
Yeah, I mean, I think offensively, except for a couple games, I think it's been consistent. Zach Reggett's leading the league in scoring. Now, keep in mind, Kansas City has played more games than everybody else, so it'll balance out. Rion Marquez has been hasn't played every game, and so injuries and injuries meaning people either playing hurt or out has already started to creep into the Comets, but they have quality depth. But when he's in, he's scoring a lot. That last home game against St. Louis, both Reggett and Marquez had a hat trick. That's what you want to see. Don Francis has been quietly started off the season terrific addition. I guess you can call him an addition. He played here during the COVID year, but in yesterday's game against St. Louis, had a hat trick, and then you can see why they wanted to bring him back. The goals that he scores, he has a cannon shot, and I think Paulo experienced that. So offensively, for the most part, solid. A lot of rotation in the midfield, and we saw yesterday some people stay at home, some people come on the trip. Defensively, that's probably where we want to talk about that. There's been a core there back on defense, including the reigning defender of the year, Chad Vandergrift. But we can talk about the release of Stefan Mijatovic and what impact that's going to have on the team moving forward. Guerrero Pino has missed the last couple games. What I understand is it's a family issue where he's been out of Kansas City and he hasn't played. But you've seen Lucia Tetsane step up,
Yeah.
and for me, Tetsane has been one of the brightest spots of the team this year. And then in goal, no Neto. It's been Ejimadu and Coronado, and they've both been dealing with injuries. And so injuries for me are not an excuse. That's part of what you have to deal with as a team, but you sort of expect that to happen nearer the end of the season rather than the beginning of the season.
Yeah, again, you never want to use injuries as an excuse. It is a factor in the games and who gets to play or how many of them you may have or what positions you have them in. But I know you're always on the position. We don't use this as an excuse. It is a factor in how these things work, but it's so far it's not been bad. But having the two main keepers at this point, because Neto seems to be slowly stepping away from the game. I don't think it's ever been announced or anything, but he's been at practice less. He hasn't gotten minutes yet this year, and you would think that if he was full time, he would probably have gotten some minutes over maybe Coronado, but Coronado's been good. He's still learning the indoor game.
Yeah, no, absolutely learning the indoor game. I think the one thing they miss with Neto and Neto's still presence, particularly with the ball on his feet.
Yeah.
And I think that teams are still pressing both of Kansas City's goalkeepers. You've seen that result in a couple goals, and I think that St. Louis in particular has been trying to press Ejimadu with ball on the feet. Sometimes it's been successful, sometimes it hasn't.
Yeah, I want to say Julio is a little better with the ball on his feet, but they can both still use a lot of work up for that.
Well, I
Philip
think
does have the edge
every
with throwing.
player, no player is complete, right? And so there's always something to work on in your game, regardless of your position. I would say that if you looked at Phillips' rookie year and compare it to now, obviously he makes great saves. We saw that his initial game against the Outlaws, the literally the first game he played several years ago. His work with his feet has gotten significantly better than his rookie year too.
Yeah,
It's just everybody has to hone their craft, and indoor soccer is a complicated game.
yeah, because it's calling for every different skill that you can have, and the normal keeper from outdoor would have need to have in doubling it with foot skills and such forth, and also having to make saves off of things that already go behind you to hit the wall.
Well, and I think we're seeing in Milwaukee too, because they brought in the goalkeeper from the Chicago Mustangs, and who's now battling Willie B for time. Scored a goal in Milwaukee's loss at Baltimore, and very comfortable with his feet. I think he scored 12 goals last season for the Chicago Mustangs, and so teams are trying to figure out what are we looking for in our goalkeeper, and we see adjustments every season.
Yeah, and every team will have a different strategy as well. They may not feel like the keeper being good at their feet is as necessary as another team, or some teams will keep that into will integrate that obviously into their play more so.
Yeah,
But
I
I've
know.
been impressed by both.
Yeah, I have too, and I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, St. Louis comes back to Cable Dom Arena. Obviously, I expect Paulo to be in goal,
Yeah,
and we know what he can do with his feet. The following week, when Milwaukee comes back, it's going to be really interesting to see whether it's Gerardo Perez or Willie B in goal, because they give different dimensions in their game, and every time Milwaukee plays Kansas City, it's both a battle and a chess match.
right. So just looking at the stats for the Comets at the moment, uh, Zach leads the team in goals and points. Well, he goals, assists, and total points, obviously. Uh, Dom is tied for second with Rion in 10 goals, but he's also got 4 assists where Rion's got one. So it's, but third coming up is Christian Andreas, 6 goals, 9 total points.
Who has, and he didn't make the trip to St. Louis too. So if you're accounting all the players who stayed in Kansas City, he was one. And then you look after Andreas, Henry Ramirez with 6 assists has been another bright spot for the Comets this year.
Yep.
And so uh, there's quality scoring at each line, which I think is really helpful as you're trying to figure out what's going to get us a pathway to the championship.
Has there been any like real surprises of who maybe has stepped up or maybe who has not had a good season so far in this first third?
Well, what's funny is and I can't recall whether this was the bad tape or the bad audio that or not, but when you and I projected our players to watch or breakout players, you had Joe Wainwright and I had David Stankovic, and they both have been, I guess, battling for playing time. Wainwright got his first minutes yesterday at St. Louis. Stankovic, 4 games, a goal and an assist, and it's just crowded in that midfield. So I think for the younger players, it's can I get my shot, and then can I hold my space? Because I'm thinking of somebody like Jacob Garza, who 2 goals early on, but we haven't seen him for a few games.
Yeah, with Wainwright, I know that the not getting time early on, a lot of it was contributing that he had injury, so he was not getting had to get back into game shape and all that stuff. So yeah, he was missing in that. I still hope that he has a breakout second half of the season or second 2/3.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't know that there's a healthy Zach Reggett. You expected him to score a lot of goals. I don't think that's a surprise. I think
right.
we expected Don Francis to come in and score a lot of goals. No surprise. Marquez, what's interesting, 10 goals in only 6 games. So if he can get constant minutes and stay at that level of production, great things are going to happen for the Comets. I think Andreas's 6 goals early on, a bit of a surprise, but he's he's sort of like a Swiss Army knife. Coach Stokic can use him in a lot of different ways, and I think that they found ways for him to be successful. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Andreas' biggest surprise, I'd say Tetsane has morphed into that defender role that Ray Lee used to have, which gives you, and you go way, way back, think Barry Wallace back in the 80s, a, a two-way player who is a threat of scoring from that left side of the yellow line. And so Tetsane, for me, has been the player I've been maybe focusing more on this season.
You know, I almost hate to say it this way, but one of the players that has pleasantly surprised me, not because he's taken huge leaps, but because I feel like he's had his best season that I've seen him play, is DeBray Holloman.
And he's gotten a lot of minutes, and actually more minutes now with the release of Mijatovic. And
Yeah,
so I think that DeBray was what they say, instead of running twos where you're every other line he's been three, so he was on an odd line.
right.
He's now getting more consistent reps, more consistent moments, and now's his opportunity to step up. I think that particularly with the schedule the way it's had been, trying to watch minutes for Nacho as Nacho came out of retirement. Pino's missed some games, and so this is really good opportunity for DeBray to cement himself as a regular defender for the Comets.
Yeah, it's just again just the eye test. I haven't went back and like watched every single game in detail, but I just feel like he's like taken another step up a little bit and is a guy that you can count on to be in that regular rotation all the time if you need to. And he's made very few mistakes to lead to goals and things like that.
Well, the other
Um,
interesting move this year has been Nathan Dirtle, who, as a rookie, played midfield. We've been seeing him more in defense, and he brings pace to the back, which I think is good because the Comets still occasionally have issues on the transition. They want to play the transition game, but teams want to transition against them. And so having a defender who can sprint back and offset 2v1 counterattacks, I think that's critical. So Nathan Dirtle's another person I'd watch the second third of the season just to see where he slots in.
Junior Kazim, well, we're kind of morphing into. We keep going back and forth
Yep.
between actually talking about yesterday's game
Yeah.
and the whole season. Um, yeah, Chase Peterson got time in, all that stuff. So we've seen a lot of different players this year, and that's always there's the double-edged sword to me on those things because yes, you want these players to develop and you want to be able to count on them and have them have game time and know what you got. At the same time, it does sometimes bring down the level of a game because you are playing those guys who are less experienced. You got to do it. It's that balance, but it sometimes will bite you a little bit.
Well, injuries aside, I think if you look at the schedule coming up in January, you have on the 4th and the 11th single weekend home games. And so I think straight up, you're going to see probably the healthiest and best 16 dress in
Right.
both games. Then you get in the middle of the month a home game, and then on a Friday a Sunday game in Milwaukee, and so that's when Coach Stokic maybe starts a little bit of rotation, and then you've got road game and then home game, and so it's the stretches where they have two games in a short period of time where Coach Stokic except where you're two on the road, right? If you have one at home and one on the road, he's sort of thinking about what players do I take with me, what players do I leave home, and I think what we saw with this stretch with St. Louis is Coach Stokic thinking about this as a 3-game series, right? At least
Right.
that's what Nick Vassos and I were told last Saturday night. So you bring your more of whom you expect to be in the 16 for that home game, knowing you have a midweek game at St. Louis where you're going to make some adjustments, and now looking ahead to Sunday, it's back to a home game with a pause for another week. So I would expect the lineup this coming Sunday to look closer to what we saw last Saturday against St. Louis than what we saw in this midweek game.
Yeah, I would agree. Uh, let's go back to Mijatovic for a second. We've mentioned him a couple times. He
Mm-hmm.
was released, waived, whatever the right technical term
Sure.
there was. Um, I I thought that at times he played fairly decently, but he also was sometimes out of position and not in sync. And also watching him in training, I felt that way at times. He was at times a really good player. Just what did you see or hear that led to them releasing him?
Yeah, before I answer that, let me just an observation about him on the field and in a very comparative way. I saw a lot of what I saw with John Sosa with Mijatovic. So Mijatovic on set pieces, Mijatovic on offense, power plays, etc.
Right.
That's where he was at his best for the Comets, right? He
Yeah, I would
could
agree.
score off restarts, he could lay off passes, very dangerous from the yellow line, totally there. I think part of the challenge was defensively um, having a step behind some of the players that he was supposed to mark, and so they were getting a lot of offensive production there. Maybe not the defensive production that they would have wanted. I don't think that had much of an impact in terms of the decision when he was brought in from Tacoma. If you recall, he came off league suspension when Tacoma traded him to Kansas City, and the understanding at the time was that he had to stay on his best behavior. He got a 1-game suspension against Milwaukee for stepping on Correa, and I think that incident, the aftermath of that incident, in terms of what to do next, was what led to the team's decision.
Yeah, I'm sure that had to play a part into it. When I asked Coach about it after the fact, and it was just not the good fit we'd hoped it would be, or something like that. It was not working out as for both sides and things like that. He goes, I wish him well. I hope everything works out for him. He continues to work on things and stuff like that. It was all very generic and all that stuff, but I just
Yeah,
read into it that yeah, he wasn't totally in sync with the team.
yeah. I think this one's a little bit different, maybe, than previous uh, player releases because we've talked about this with the Rega trade to Harrisburg several years ago. We talked about this when Leo Gibson and John Sosa were released. Comets fans have a tendency, have maybe even more so than other teams, to really support their players, like support their players to the bitter end, and they take very personally when
Yep.
players go. There were some questions raised about Mijatovic, but he hadn't been there long enough where we saw that level of outcry maybe from Comets fans. I think they were curious about him leaving. There were some people that were clearly disappointed that he left, but not to the same degree that we've seen with other moves in the past. But in the end, it's about the team and what's best for the team and what's going to give the team the best chances to bring a championship trophy back to Kansas City. And I think that was all part of the calculus in this situation.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And for fans, they if he had been here a little bit longer and he also didn't have a history playing against them, that probably also plays a little bit to it. Yeah, some players you have to warm up to. You know what I mean? It's he if he'd been here for a full year or two, that might be a little bit different. They might have complained about it, but as it was, not so much. I do wish him
Well,
well though, and I
yeah.
know I saw a lot of other teams wishing that, or fans from a couple other teams wishing that they could get him. So
Well, I'd say two things. One is whether or not it's accurate. He keeps showing up on Kings League USA rosters, so that's definitely
yeah,
a lane for him in the immediate future. I think with any other team, it's part of the same calculus. Uh, the Comets gave him sort of the one extra time.
yeah.
He's in a situation with the league right now where he's on probably the thinnest ice possible, and so if you were to sign him, it's with that understanding.
I don't know. Is he on thinner ice than our friend in Milwaukee?
I think they're both on the same ice right now. Is my understanding is at this point moving forward, and so I think that that's that's a concern and a calculation for everybody, and we'll be seeing. Well, I believe we'll be seeing Mr. Huffman on the 11th. That's supposedly his first game back from suspension, and
Right.
so what could happen that day?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting that the league would give him the perfect amount of suspension that he would be able to come back and play against the Comets in the first game back. I'm not going to put any conspiracy theories out there, so but it is just kind of interesting, funny.
I think it's very coincidental, but it's also they set a bar with Leo Acosta. You might recall Acosta got
Yep.
red carded in that first game against St. Louis, and so they set a bar in terms of what's not going to be tolerated. And I think the determination was the the history and what happened on the field and off the field in that incident with Huffman. They calculated a penalty. I think it was more coincidental than not that he'll be
Yeah.
back on the 11th. But what's also interesting too is the league announced that Kansas City will have 3 home games on Fox Soccer Plus coming up in January. The first one being the St. Louis game on Sunday. The second one being the Milwaukee Wave on January 11th.
Yeah, I noticed that you guys got three of those Fox Soccer games. The is it just a curious? I don't know if you can say, but this was 6 games announced for January. Are there more games after that, or is this just
Uh,
one block? Or
I,
can you
I,
say? Do you know?
I don't know. My understanding is this is a maybe a trial, and I think that it's safe to say if you look at where the games were placed, there was confidence that the league had in terms of the production. So San Diego gets the one game on FS2, and then Kansas City and Empire get the remaining games. So I think that there was some confidence in the production in all three of those arenas, and that's why they were slaughtered in.
Yeah, not in St. Louis. No, huh.
Hey, St.
Interesting.
Louis got more Golazo games this season than Kansas City did. So I think the league is confident in the production. I think it's fair to say if you watch their games, and this is probably philosophical, Thad, that Joey and Matt have no qualms about being St. Louis announcers. We take a
Right.
different approach in Kansas City, but they proudly uh, call the games like they're ambush announcers, and that works for them. But
I thought
for
the
Galazzo, we would approach that a little bit differently.
I thought the league was trying to go a little bit more away from being just completely homer announcers, though.
Well, I mean, to be fair on them, they do their research on Kansas City. I think that they, for different reasons, they
Do they read the pronunciation guides?
Well, to be fair, sometimes the pronunciation guides aren't accurate. We could like
No, I know,
kind of
I know.
go into stories of how we've helped rename some Comets players over the years, but I think they relish maybe more than we do in Kansas City that St. Louis Kansas City rivalry. So they very much want to lean in on St. Louis versus Kansas City. And you hear Joey talk about the greatest soccer city in the United States. He's now said that the last couple games, so as not to infringe on any trademarks that might be owned by Sporting Kansas City. But they definitely lean in on that. For us, my opinion is Kansas City Milwaukee is still the number one rivalry. And so, yes, it's a big deal when St. Louis comes to town to play Kansas City. But in terms of the pure rivalry, MASL,
Yeah.
uh, Milwaukee is just up a few more notches.
Look, I get the rivalry thing. I still prefer announcers to be more balanced than what they are. Again, I don't have a problem with if I know that you are rooting for the Comets inside, right? You want the Comets to do well. And I know Nick wants that, but you're in the broadcast, you're much more level about how you do that. And sometimes maybe a little too trying to be too impartial at times.
Yeah.
But
In an ideal world, Thad, there would be a national broadcast and a local broadcast, right? And then the national broadcasters could do and say whatever they want from a
right.
more neutral perspective. But I would challenge that too. Tell me how many Chiefs fans are big fans of Tony Romo's announcing. Tell me how many Royals fans are big fans of Joe Buck's announcing. So even if you had neutral announcers, there's still people who are going to complain and say they're against us. And I think that's the nature of fandom.
Yeah,
And
it is. It's all a very fair point. I speak from my viewpoint as I would rather announcers be more balanced and again, I don't have a problem with a announcer like, oh, that was a great goal, da, 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 that sort of thing, and being happy. Just it kind of just goes a little too far for me sometimes. And yeah, no, I do think some of those announcers that you mentioned for Chiefs fans are very unfairly criticized with how they do their announcing. But all right, it also probably means more to the ambush to have the rivalry with Kansas City than Kansas City back, just because we do have that long Milwaukee, like you said, rivalry.
yeah, no, I think that's right. And to a minor extent, Baltimore, I'd say that the challenge with the Kansas City Baltimore rivalry is they just haven't had a lot of games in recent years. But
Yeah,
if you go back a decade ago, that was a pretty intense rivalry.
yeah, you're right. Um, I'm getting a little off of just soccer and indoor soccer in general, but uh, since I am a original St. Louis native and then I moved to Kansas City, for a long time it felt like Kansas City had an inferiority complex to St. Louis with their teams, with the Royals, and just a lot of things because of how the state government worked, how the sports worked, soccer for forever. St. Louis dominated youth soccer and all that type of stuff, and then the tide changed at one point, and it's a lot more even to even the point where Kansas City's dominated at times. The colleges, UMKC is rising as a national power in Division I soccer. You had UMSL, who was forever one of the best soccer colleges. All these things just have it's balanced out a lot more, but it's also the point where on the soccer side of it, Kansas City really does have the on the professional level. Sporting has existed as an original team. St. Louis City is an upstart who tries to like, oh, we're the soccer capital of the world kind of thing when they don't have the history. Indoor
Yeah,
soccer, the Comets have way more positive history than the Ambush or even some of those previous teams there. We have NWSL. We've had two NWSL teams. Just all those type of things come into play, and so it's almost like they have that inferiority complex where Kansas City is the big brother that they want to hate versus
well, yeah, I think you heard a little bit of it on the broadcast. They Joey and Matt admitted the only professional title that St. Louis has won was the Ambush, what, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they admitted that. They also admitted that it's been tough sledding recently for the Ambush in this rivalry, and that yesterday's win was the first in quite a few if you date
Yeah,
back
like
to,
10
to last
games, I
season.
think is what
Yeah.
they said.
Yeah, and so no, it's been a struggle for them, and I think what if you think about it, they didn't have any um, first division outdoor men's soccer since the late 70s when the St. Louis Stars moved to Anaheim, became the California Surf, and so they've been watching or ignoring what's been happening in Kansas
Yep.
City all these years. You had first MLS and then NWSL, and then all the national team games in Kansas City and Copa America, and now the World Cup. I mean, there's no denying that Kansas City collectively has had more soccer attention than St. Louis has, and so it is how you reposition yourself and all that. And I think it's great that St. Louis City has come into existence, but
Yes.
what else? SLU had a great year. The men's team finished, made it to the Final Four this year, but what else?
Yeah. And again, well, as a Comets fan, I will relish in beating the Ambush every time, but it is good for the league. And it is good actually for the rivalry for the Ambush to be good enough to challenge to win someday win an Ice 70 Cup, which by the way, we didn't even mention that in the first 8 games they won an Ice 70 Cup.
Yeah, no, they did. I think you see, I talked to Paulo after that last home game here in Kansas City. So, last Saturday? Um, and I told him, you've got guys who can score. Yes, Duduka is out for the season, but Torrealba is quickly becoming the Comets' nemesis. I mean, that was like really, really quick.
Yeah.
Uh, Mario Falzoni, I thought, has looked good. He was a little quiet yesterday, but he scored a couple great goals in the last previous games against Kansas City, and Eske is getting back on track. And so they have guys who can score. They've brought in some pieces over the last couple years, and so this is to me, a more competitive and balanced team
Yes.
than what we've seen over the last couple years.
It also they've tried to become a more transitional team, and I think they were getting success with that last year, but they are really getting success with it this year. It was always easy to pick them as one of the bottom couple teams, but they will probably prove me wrong at this point. I think they will make the playoffs if they keep this up. They're not going to be a top team at this point, but they look like a solid middle tier team at this point. Is that
No, I
fair?
think that's right, and I think that the matchup between Kansas City and St. Louis lends itself to St. Louis being a transition team because the Comets want to push forward and score goals,
Yeah.
and they've been susceptible, and so that I can't tell you how many times I point out on the broadcast William Eske being wide open on the right side in the counterattack. I think for St. Louis's part, they've just missed the final, whether it's the final pass, the final shot, in just about every game they played against Kansas City. I think it's been their finishing of shots and finishing of passes that have prevented them to go from the middle of the pack to more of a contender.
Yeah.
It's almost there, but I think if you were to watch tape, even including yesterday's game, you'll be like, how come that shot didn't go in? I mean, there's too many times for them where it's like, if we had just scored that goal in the second quarter, things would have been way different. And if they put all those pieces together, they could be a formidable team for the playoffs.
Yeah, that's very true. You could say that really about almost any team at some point, though. If they can put all those pieces together, they can at the right time.
Yeah, but I think they have the talent. I mean, if you wanted to seed them versus other teams, I think Tacoma, we found out pretty quickly, there's no place like home because they got absolutely rocked in San Diego the other night. And so, I mean, I think if you were to look roster for roster, you would say St. Louis on any given day probably would have an advantage over Tacoma. Empire, after that uh, season opening overtime win in San Diego, they've been struggling, and so yeah, I think that there's a chance there for St. Louis. They're good enough to be considered as a playoff team.
Yeah, and again, it is a step up from how they've been in the past, and it is a good for the league, and it is good for the rivalry. So it's a positive for the. But I did kind of laugh when I saw the headline on one of the MLS articles: "A historic start for St. Louis." Yeah, they're still kind of like, yeah, okay,
Yeah, but yeah, the
it
other team we've
is.
talked about is UCFC. I mean, you talk about on paper. I think St. Louis on paper it has more talent right now than UCFC does. UCFC
I would agree.
lost so many of their core players in the offseason that just looking that way, I would expect St. Louis to be in the playoffs.
We've talked about the first 8 games for the Comets. Uh, uh, they're the only ones that has played over 8 games at this point. The Wave have 7, the Ambush have 7, Baltimore has 6, but you have the other teams with 4 and 5 games. Are you surprised by Empire being down at the bottom at
I
this
am,
point?
and part of it was the fact that they did something that they've struggled at in recent years is go down to San Diego and get a victory. I thought,
Yeah,
hey, maybe they're finally turning the corner, and some of it is psychological for them. But I think teams have found out how to play against Obasi ball. The fact that St. Louis went to Empire and won there, that's pretty huge.
right.
So that should tell you a lot. I think that yeah, Empire's struggling right now. They lost in Milwaukee yesterday. San Diego is going to get their groove back. So if anybody thought that San Diego was washed up, don't believe that. They're going to be fine. I think for the Comets, though, you have other teams have games in hand against the Comets. That's why it's going to be so critical as we look at the second, third, that, or if you want to just focus on January, you have to get 3 points every home game. That for sure. And as you said, average 2 on the road. I mean, that's the way you have to look at this in the next part of this calendar because Baltimore, they're going to win at home. They were struggling on the road, but they won fairly convincingly in Utica yesterday. If Baltimore starts winning some of these road games and they get to go back to Utica again, they're going to catch up and pass the Comets in points pretty quickly. So it's going to be incumbent on the Comets to hold serve where you can, and
Yep.
then those big matchup dates when Baltimore comes to Cable Dahmer Arena, you've got to. Baltimore took the 3 points there. You've got to take the 3 points here. There, there's not much room for error if you're the Comets. Sure, could they struggle and make the playoffs? Yeah, but that's not the goal. The goal's not making the playoffs. The goal's
Right.
winning the championship. And to maximize your chance to win the championship, you need a 1 or a 2 seed.
I just want to throw a couple things out there real quick. Uh, you mentioned the championship is the goal. I asked Zach after the last game, what's it mean to you to win the I-70 Cup and the last home game, and he's like, he goes, I'm probably gonna get some hate for this, but it doesn't mean anything. The Ron Newman Cup is the only goal,
That's right.
so that's his focus, and I have no problem with that, because he's been part of the rivalries in every different direction, but the goal is winning the final trophy. Um, and just we've kind of bounced around talking about the first, third, and a little bit about the St. Louis game, but this last game in St. Louis, which would have been their ninth game. Um, again, if they brought some younger players, they rested some players because of the 3 games in 7 days type of in playing exactly the same team. So maybe they want to throw some different things out there. Junior got his first time and didn't look too bad, but had one of the worst misses possible from 5 feet out of goal and hits the inside of the top of the crossbar and bounces back down and out. Um, again, he's that's his first playing time, so we'll see how he continues to progress. Just and some of those other younger players that haven't got a lot of time got that playing time, but no Rion, no Pino. Uh, in no Nacho, some of those veterans that maybe would have settled things down a little bit differently or added a goal here, things like that. That may have been a completely different game. But fair play to the Ambush for getting their first win in 10 games or against the Comets, whatever it was.
Yeah, let me say this a different way. Coach Stokic didn't put a lineup together intending to lose in St. Louis, right? He had confidence in the
No.
16 guys that he dressed to win that game. So
And they were very close. When you go to
it,
overtime, it's a toss up at that point.
that is absolutely true. And so, I mean, fans who are saying, "Oh, he should have played all these players," I think you got to look at the end goal. The end goal is the Ron Newman Cup.
Right.
With 3 games within 1 week, if any players are carrying nagging injuries, you don't want to make a short-term decision that has long-term consequences. And so this was a calculated risk. They still got a point. And I think before this all started, I had said to you that they need to get results in all 6 games. Well, they've gotten results in the 5 so far. They need to get 3 on Sunday. And then you could say, okay, that was pretty good.
And then you also, at one point, I mentioned Paulo, and I want to jump in there, but you were talking. I didn't want to interrupt you. Uh, Paulo is one of those players who, as a fan from the other team, you love to hate him during the game, but he is such a class act. And I rarely do this and go up into players from other teams, but I just went up to him after the game and just wanted to say, "Hey, man, you're a class act. You're a great keeper, but because he comes over and interacts with fans, even though they're harassing him, and he's not the only keeper that does this. But he very much does this. Yeah, he will sometimes get a little fiery on the field, but everybody does, and it's never over the line that I can recall. But after the game, before the game, he's walking through saying hi to fans, to opposing team. He's just a very classy guy in that regards.
Well, for me, when you think about MVPs, you think about players. What would the team be like without that player?
Right.
Could you imagine what the St. Louis Ambush would be like this season or any season without Paulo in goal?
Yeah. It's a
That I mean, they had Pollo Cortez for a while. Pollo is with the U.S. Kings League team right now, but uh, Paulo's been their guy for how many years? And some of the saves he's made against the Comets this year are uh, stand on your head quality saves.
Yep. And I feel like he might be slowing down a touch, but he is still an amazing keeper and deserves respect. And you know, he's class in that regard. So I just
So
wanted to throw that out there because we
yeah, I took a little grief. I could probably use a stronger word that a few years ago I was put on the spot on one of those shows, so sort of like my all-time 6, who would I want? And um, I tried to do 2 players from each era, the MISL era, the MPSL era, and the current MASL era. And I was like, all right, why not Paulo in goal? And that's controversial if you're picking a
yeah.
goalie from this era, because why not Danny Waltman? Why not Boris Pardo? But if you put Paulo on the San Diego Sockers in his career, as opposed to St. Louis Ambush, what would his record have been? How many championships would he have won? Uh,
Yeah.
uh, it's hard to compare goalkeepers because they're in different situations, but I think historically he's going to wind up being overlooked just because of the situation he was in, and it's unfortunate to him because he said he's a class act.
Yeah. And it's interesting you put him on there because I don't think I would necessarily, although I'd have to think about it really hard. Um, but he would be deserving of at least being in that mention. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
at least in the running for that spot. So I don't know if I
right.
would agree with you putting him there, but I can't disagree really either. Like I don't know who I would. I'd have to think really hard about who I would put there because there's been some really great keepers, and it is like every athlete in any sport when you compare different eras, it's hard to compare them. Like well, would Babe Ruth have been a great hitter in the modern era? Well,
Right.
maybe great training methods, but would he have done those? All these other factors, it's hard. So you kind of compare them in their eras. Would Alan Mayer have been the best keeper in the current league? You know what I mean? Things like that.
Well, and it's such a different game now. And I
Right.
talked to Coach Mayer quite a bit. And you know, one name I didn't mention as all is the two-time defending goalie of the year, Chris Toth, who's terrific.
Yep.
And San Diego still has to figure out where are we using Toth versus where are we using Pardo. But it's such a keeper sweeper game now where a goalkeeper to be elite has to produce with his feet, right? You need to be part of the offense. You don't necessarily have to score goals, a la Empire, but you have to be more than just a shot blocker and somebody who can throw the ball down the field for your team to be successful. And people who want to reminisce about the good old days of indoor soccer, there were relatively few goalkeepers back in the 80s and early 90s who could play the ball well with their
Right.
feet. Relatively few. You had, there's still video out there of before the rules change of defenders taking indoor goal kicks. That's in an indoor field. Defenders were taking goal kicks. So
Yeah.
that's how the game has evolved in the decades.
And every sport evolves over decades, and it's when you can find and be on the front part of those waves of different changes, then you can have great success, or you can just buy teams. But yeah, it's just always interesting, and I would love to sit down with people who can speak knowledgeably about all those different eras and grill them on some of the best players that would be able to transform their game depending on the era. But I don't know that I'm capable of doing that myself because even though I
No, but
watched a lot,
yeah, I mean, I think for goalkeeper, and we talked earlier about Philip Ejimadu, as his comfort with the ball on his feet continues to improve, then his game becomes that much more well-rounded. And
yep,
as many times as Kenny Mayer tries to tell me, there's your goalkeeper of the year. I think he'll be under consideration when he's that comfortable as Chris Toth is, et cetera. I don't think there have been any doubts that he's a top three goalie in this league.
yep. All right. Just because as usual, we don't always stick very well with our plan of how we discuss things because we kind of cross over things, but it's so easy to do with this topic. Any last thoughts about the last two ambush Kansas City games?
I'll go back to something that you said earlier, that the Comets have yet to play a complete game, and so
Yeah,
you look at the home game, they scored 9 goals, but something that the coaching staff told me last year is, and I don't know if it's evolved for this season, is they want to score a minimum of 7 goals every game and concede no more than 3. And,
yeah,
and, and even when they do that, there's still things they're going to want to improve. Look back at the results this year, and maybe there was that first home game against St. Louis where you could say, okay, that was pretty close, but um, they want that to be the consistent result and not struggle on either side of the ball. And so I think you saw a lot of offense that home game. I'd say yesterday, a little bit of mixed results. 5-4, but they were behind quite a bit. They came back from behind, which is good. Don Francis, terrific. Young guys uh, got time, got opportunity. Ali Alamari, kudos to him. I've heard a lot about him. I saw some of his tape from his time with the Rochester Lancers in M2, and it was good finally seeing him in a game situation. And kudos to him again on that assist. But uh, I don't know. The results are still good, but not great. And
right.
these next 2 games, I think we'll find out where Coach Stokish's head is in terms of the 16 plus guys that he wants to put on the scorecard. And these are 2 rivalry games, right? Those are the games you expect your teams to step up and rise to the occasion.
Speaking of the trying to give up 3 goals or less, they've only done that 3 times this season out of 9 games, and of course, all 3 of those were against the ambush. who we've praised, but is still a team that's trying to find their footing and get a groove also. The probably the best in that regard was the shootout win in at the ambush 3 games
Yep.
ago.
I
They
think
kept them down to two.
if you later this month see 3 goals or less against Milwaukee or Empire or Tacoma, I think then it's sort of a different mindset on the
Right,
coaching staff.
right. So uh, just want to go to Ollie for a second because you had mentioned him a couple different times, and just this last time, watching him in practice, I can see all the skill that he has. Same for Stankovic, uh, and some of these other guys who haven't had as much playing time this year because they are new to the team because they're been coming off injuries like Wainwright, etc. Uh, and we mentioned Henry Ramirez earlier, but just in the when we're looking at stats, he's a guy who he's got like 7 assists, I think, 6 assists, something, 6 assists and one
Yep.
goal,
Yep.
and he's just been very, very good. He's had moments over the last couple of years where he's been good. I shouldn't say moment, but lengths of time, but then would have an injury and take him out of the game or things like that. So he's a guy that's just becoming very reliably good with this team. But like I watched back to Ali and Stankovic versus watching them in practice, you can see all the ability they have, but you can also see that they still are trying to learn what coach wants them to do and when, and that makes a big difference with when you can have a teams when you have players playing at their best and they know what the teams want them to do and they will be reliably doing that.
Right.
Now, not saying every starter reliably does everything they're supposed to do all the time, but still, you want to get those young guys integrated in that regard.
Well, and there's one person, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention his name, Ramon Palmer, who played
Yeah,
in the game yesterday. The Comets released this on social, courtesy of your colleague Mike Hune, and so Ramon Palmer going into yesterday's game was tied with Eddie Carmine all-time appearances, and so he's topped Carmine now. Dale Mitchell is next. And so when you think about all-time greats, all-time Comets attack players with longevity, he's getting in some really interesting company there. And kudos
yeah,
to Ramon for continuing to be that presence in the later stages of his career.
yeah. He's only got 4 games at this point. He's got a goal. He's he's a guy who I think it's appropriate that he's only getting every couple games at this point, just age and experience and some building younger guys and stuff. If it was a must win game for a playoff, you might have start him over everybody else just because of the experience that he has. And so yeah, kudos to him, man. All right. Hopefully I've stopped all the callbacks to everything we've already talked about. The next third of the season is where we were going to at one point. Um, a lot of games here in January coming up, right?
A bunch of games in January, and it starts with 2 home games right away. So the ambush this weekend, Milwaukee coming up on the 11th, but then they've got a Friday night game on the 16th against the Tacoma Stars. And you'd think, hey, Tacoma just got blanked in San Diego 8-0. That'll be an easy one. But Tacoma, for some reason, seems to have Kansas City's number at Cable Dahmer Arena. And so you can't look past anything. Obviously, success is 9 points there.
Yeah, you got to get those wins at home, like we've talked about. But finishing off the series against St. Louis for the entire year. Again, crazy scheduling. Thank you, MASL. But yeah,
That's one
these
way
are
to
three
look at
important
it.
games.
That's one way to look at it. I actually look at it. Hey, this is just the first game against St. Louis in 2026. So half full, half empty, right?
Yeah, I think in this case, Eric, I'm just going to say you're delusional.
Uh-huh.
It's okay. It goes both ways, man. It's with all due respect. Yeah, it's just to me, it's just crazy scheduling. But I've complained about scheduling before, and as I will counter myself, MLS, who owns pretty much all their stadiums, can't get scheduling correct. and they have Sporting and St. Louis City playing each other on Wednesday nights, both games. Like neither team gets a weekend home game against the rival. It
Yeah,
is
go figure.
asinine, and it's incredibly bad. And that's teams that mostly all own their own stadium, so there's not the big conflicts. So
So
they
so
should be able to do that.
talk to me in a few months when it seems like Kansas City and San Diego keep playing against each other. It's not to the same degree, but the March will be a lot of the San Diego Soccers.
Well, and that's the other end of the craziness. Why can that not happen earlier? Like some of those spread out differently. I know scheduling is not easy, and I will say this every time to be fair, but it can't be that hard. But the next 7 games, because we're 1 games into the middle 8, the next 7 games, home against the Ambush, home against the Wave, home against the Stars, on the road against the Wave, on the road against Empire, home against Empire, and then on the road at Milwaukee. How many
Yeah,
points can they get out of those 7 games, remaining 7 games?
well, obviously they won 21, but yeah, middle teens would be good. So I mean, minimum, you're thinking the 4 wins at home would be 12 points. Max would be 21. So somewhere in the middle there would be pretty successful. And so you start by winning your games at home, and that's it. They have to go in thinking these are must-win games. And on the broadcast on Sunday, I'm going to say this is a must-win game for Kansas City and must-win in regulation. That's the way they have to think about that.
Yeah, and totally respect that point of view because I don't disagree with it. For me right now, the key game in the next 3 is the Wave.
Got bad taste in their mouths after the last one. And the
Yeah,
other reason why that's must win is if you look at the standings, Milwaukee has some games in hand and they could top the Comets. The Comets can hold them at bay with a win because it's a 6 point flip, right?
yep.
You gain 3 points, they lose 3 points. That's the way you have to look at some of these matchups. We'll be talking about this when they start seeing the Soccers a lot. It's a 6 point flip. You win 3, you take 3 away from them. That's the way they have to think about this.
What, five games against San Diego in the last 9 games or something like that? Yeah.
Well, every game's critical, but some games are more critical because if you're are jockeying for playoff position, you want to cement your spot and then kind of kick your leg at the team trying to pass you, and that'll be the case with Milwaukee, with San Diego, with Baltimore, and these critical games coming up.
Yeah, and 2 of those games are back to back Saturday, Sunday game, Friday, Sunday game. Um, they they do slightly favor the Comets in the travel portion of that because of San Diego has to travel to Kansas City, and then both teams have to travel to San Diego to play. But Comets only have to travel once before the second
Yeah,
game, where San Diego has to travel both ways. Kansas City's been on the bad end of that on other games with St. Louis, but it's again not to whine, just analyzing where the advantage is.
yeah.
Um, but again, crazy that there's that many games in that short of time. All right. Uh, in this last the next 7, like I said, they got to win that game against Milwaukee in Kansas City just out of self-respect. They because that was not a good loss. The one there, the one of a couple games ago. That's one home game I missed, so I did not get to see all the brouhaha with Huffman or uh, Mijatovic. But they absolutely have to win that game, and they need to do it by more than 1 goal, not in overtime.
Yep, totally agree with that. They need to send a message because they'll travel to Milwaukee the following week. I think that this would be a good time to remind our listeners to one of the key adages about the Major Arena Soccer League. You cannot count on any other MASL team to do you any favors. So
No,
if you're the Comets and you're thinking, oh, we'll just let the Soccers knock off Milwaukee a few times, or Utica knock off Baltimore for us. You can't count on that. And we've already seen Baltimore go win in Utica, and we saw Milwaukee go win in San Diego. And so you can't make assumptions that anybody is going to do you any favors. You have to take care of your own business and not hope that the teams chasing you wind up losing points. If it happens, it's great, but you can't count on it.
Yeah, and despite uh, Empire being down with only one win, Utica being down there with only one win, uh, San Diego being down there with only two wins. But one of the aspects of this league having shrunk to 8 teams is that each team, I think, has gotten stronger for the most part. Utica is probably the one that's not gotten much stronger, but um, it is a game. It is a league where you cannot count on getting wins against anybody at this point, at home or on the road.
Unless you're Baltimore and you're probably winning 11 or 12 at home, but that's sort of with an asterisk.
Yeah, again, Baltimore should move down to MASL 2 until they can get a real arena, but I know that's not going to happen, and I will piss off some Baltimore fans by having said that. Oh well, I'm sure I've pissed them off before. Again, I would not want Baltimore to leave the league because they are such a historic team within this league. But man, I hate watching those games in there, and it's just a completely different game. It's like a practice arena, which yeah. All right. Anything else we need to talk about today?
No, other than if you had asked me a couple months ago, what is the atmosphere going to be like on January 4th at Cable Dom Arena with the Chiefs playing the Raiders the same day, I would have had some serious questions, but hoping for a stronger turnout. Not only the final Kansas City St. Louis game, but the fact that the Chiefs have been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. Good opportunity to fans to come watch a first place Kansas City team this Sunday.
Yeah, if the Raiders game was in Kansas City, because it's not, right? It's on the road.
It's in Vegas, yeah.
Yeah. I still don't think of them being in Vegas, but yes, Vegas. Um, that would still probably make a difference just because there'll be cheap tickets out there for people to go watch at least a game. But no, Mahomes eliminated from the playoffs for a while now. Yeah, it's not going to draw nearly as much interest. And Comets fans are pretty loyal to seeing their team. So, all right,
So that's
anything
it.
else?
No, just happy New Year to you, all our listeners, Comets Nation, and hopefully there'll be some even better news for Comets fans as we head towards April.
All right, cool. I appreciate the time, Eric. I appreciate you joining me and lending your expertise and knowledge and broadcast ability to this podcast. I appreciate you over the last few years. I appreciate you going forward. Uh, I love hearing from listeners. People come up and like, oh, I was listening to you on the pod, and you're wrong, or you're right, or Eric needs to do this, or whatever. Right? It's just it's engagement, and I don't do this for engagement like that. I do this mostly because I just want to talk soccer.
Yeah.
But knowing that other people have any interest in listening to us, I appreciate it. I know this isn't Thanksgiving. This is New Year's. You have any good soccer New Year's resolutions? Or,
Um,
or bad ones? I don't care if they're good, actually.
maybe taking the criticism I received more with a grain of salt rather than taking it personally. I think everybody has an opinion, everybody
Right.
has a different style, and being okay with it. But you said it's not Thanksgiving, but I've said this before, Thad. But thanks for what you do with Soccer Journal, because not too many cities have this amazing coverage across the spectrum of soccer, and so thanks for all the hours that you put in, not just for the Comets, the Sporting Kansas City, for the current and countless other teams in town. We're really fortunate in Kansas City, and we shouldn't take that for granted.
Thank you. And but mostly, I love talking soccer. I love covering soccer in Kansas City. I enjoy basically any and all forms of soccer, and this has been weird because like this year was a little bit of a grind at times, just with how bad some teams were and how difficult some teams were to cover. And I know this year, 2026, is going to be as difficult, if not more so, because of World Cup and breaks and all this other stuff going on. And so I've actually just kind of taken the last few weeks to try to just decompress a lot. And I feel like more relaxed now than I have in a long time. I've been doing some other stuff, not focusing as much on soccer, but this is going to be a busy year and it's going to be fun.
It's going to be a historic year in Kansas City. I think all Kansas City soccer fans can take some pride not only in what we already have, but what we're going to get with the World coming to Kansas City this summer. And it's something that many of us haven't seen in our lifetimes, and we'll see whether future generations of Kansas Cityans get another opportunity like this.
Yep, and thankfully we have Arrowhead where they can play World Cup games at.
We do.
Not any slam on moving teams or anything there. Anyway, I appreciate the time, Eric. I think we are done and we are out.
Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination. We hope you enjoyed the flight and have a nice day.